Camp Barkley, Texas, March 15, 1944. The afternoon sun beat down on the intelligence office where Oberst Wilhelm Richter spread captured American documents across his desk. The Wehrmacht intelligence officer adjusted his reading glasses and examined the personnel roster of the 357th Infantry Regiment, 90th Infantry Division. His lips curled into a thin smile as he read the profiles. Farm boys from Texas and Oklahoma. Average age 21. Zero combat experience. 18 months of training on American soil, far from the crucible of real war. Their commander, Colonel Andrew D. Bruce, was a reserve officer, not a graduate of the prestigious West Point Academy. Richter laughed and called over his aide. He pointed to one entry in particular. Private Harold Frank, 21 years old. Occupation listed as farmer from Flatonia, Texas. No university education. Drafted in 1943. Richter shook his head and lit a cigarette. His division had men who survived Stalingrad, who fought through the North African desert, who endured the brutal Eastern Front where temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, and Soviet artillery turned entire battalions into memory. Those were soldiers. These Americans were children playing at war. Richter compiled his assessment report and wrote with confident strokes. The 357th Regiment exemplifies American weakness. Inexperienced farmers dispatched with expensive equipment, but lacking true warrior spirit. Our veteran Lancers will slaughter them within weeks. Wars are not won by material abundance, they are won by men hardened through fire and blood. What Oberst Richter failed to comprehend was that he was analyzing a regiment destined to fight for 308 consecutive days, without pause, to suffer more than 6,000 casualties, double its original strength, to capture over 70,000 German prisoners, and to prove that modern industrial warfare favored not the warrior elite, but the inexhaustible system. The 357th Infantry Regiment would not triumph because its soldiers were superior to Wehrmacht veterans. It would triumph because the American replacement system transformed adequate soldiers into an unstoppable force through infinite reinforcement, limitless supplies, and efficient medical evacuation that kept the machine perpetually operational even as individual components were destroyed and replaced. The arithmetic of destruction was already written in the ledgers of American industrial might before a single soldier of the 357th set foot on Utah Beach. In 1944, the United States produced approximately 96,000 combat aircraft. Germany, struggling under Allied bombing and resource depletion, manufactured 39,000. American factories delivered 17,000 Sherman tanks that year. German plants operating with slave labor and dwindling materials produced 19,000 armored vehicles of all types, but only 6,000 were the formidable Panthers and Tigers that German tankers preferred. The disparity extended beyond hardware. The United States trained and deployed 89 divisions to the European theater. Germany, fighting on multiple fronts, was bleeding experienced soldiers at rates that made replacement mathematically impossible. By mid-1944, the average age of Wehrmacht infantry recruits had risen to 17 years old, and some divisions were filling ranks with men over 40 who had been rejected as unfit years earlier. America sent teenagers too, but behind each American soldier stood a replacement pipeline that could deliver a fresh replacement within days of a casualty. Behind each German soldier stood nothing but exhaustion and hope. The 357th Infantry Regiment entered this equation as one small component of a vast machine. Its initial strength of approximately 3,000 men represented a tiny fraction of American combat power. Yet this regiment alone would consume German prisoners at a ratio of 23-1, 70,000 captured enemies versus its own original size. The mathematics were inescapable. The Wehrmacht was fighting a war of attrition it had already lost on spreadsheets in Washington and Detroit, long before the first shot was fired in Normandy. Each American casualty could be replaced. Each German loss was permanent. The 357th would prove this theorem through blood. June 6, 1944. H-hour. The 357th Infantry Regiment stormed ashore at Utah Beach as part of the 90th Infantry Division's combat debut. Within hours, the regiment encountered the reality that no amount of Texas training could simulate. The hedgerows of Normandy, ancient earth walls crowned with thorny vegetation that transformed every field into a fortress. German machine gun teams positioned in these hedgerows turned the bocage into a killing ground, measured in yards per day rather than miles. On June 10th, the regiment's first major engagement, the 357th lost 99 men in a single day attempting to advance past their line of departure. Private Harold Frank, carrying a Browning automatic rifle weighing 19 pounds, remembered his first contact with the enemy. He saw his first dead German soldier sprawled in a ditch, then immediately afterward his first dead American, a 19-year-old kid from Company B whose name Frank never learned. Frank vomited into the hedgerow and a sergeant told him to get used to it because he would see thousands more. The sergeant was correct. The regiment pushed forward through the Cottontam Peninsula, fighting for villages with names like Gourbesville and Beaucadre. Each town cost lives. Each hedgerow demanded blood. By early July, the 357th had been in continuous combat for 30 days and had already suffered casualties approaching 500 men, nearly 17% of its strength. But new soldiers kept arriving. Trucks brought replacements from the replacement depots the soldiers cynically called Reppel-Deppels, transit camps where fresh recruits from America were processed and assigned to units that needed bodies. The replacements were often younger than the original cadre. Many had never been outside their home states before deployment, and they arrived at the front lines within hours of leaving the depot. Harold Frank described teaching a group of new replacements the basics of survival in October 1944. He gave them 30 minutes of instruction. Keep your head down, dig your foxhole deep, shoot without hesitation. Half were dead within a week. But the trucks always brought more. The Wehrmacht had no equivalent system. German casualties were permanent losses. The Siege of Metz. 77 Days in Hell. October 1944. The 90th Infantry Division arrived at Metz, an ancient fortress city on the Moselle River that had resisted conquest for over 1,500 years. The city was ringed by forts built by the Germans in the 19th century and reinforced during the Nazi occupation. Concrete fortifications with overlapping fields of fire, underground galleries, and walls thick enough to resist heavy artillery. The 357th Infantry Regiment was assigned to capture Fort de Koenigsmacher on the northern approach. The battle lasted from October 14th to November 12th, 29 days of brutal infantry combat in mud, rain, and winter cold. The regiment suffered approximately 3,500 casualties during the Metz campaign, more than its entire original strength. Yet the regiment never ceased to exist as a fighting force because every day brought new soldiers to replace the dead and wounded. Gefreiter Klaus Müller, a German soldier of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division defending Metz, wrote a letter home that was intercepted by Allied intelligence in November 1944. His words captured the German perspective on fighting the Americans. "We have battled the 357th Regiment for weeks. We kill hundreds of them, but they return with more. Yesterday we destroyed an entire platoon. Today a fresh platoon attacked the same position. We started this battle with 120 men in our company. Now we have 43. We have received no replacements for 2 months. Food is scarce. Ammunition is rationed. The Americans fire artillery as if shells were infinite. We counted over 500 rounds in a single hour. We are not losing because we are cowards. We are losing because they possess everything and we possess nothing except courage, and courage cannot stop high-explosive shells." Müller was killed 2 weeks later when Metz fell. The 357th captured approximately 3,500 German prisoners during the siege. Many were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk, but could not survive the American system of infinite resupply. These hardened warriors surrendered not because they lacked fighting spirit, but because they lacked food, ammunition, and hope. Harold Frank remembered entering one German position after its surrender. The defenders had been eating grass and roots. Their ammunition stocks consisted of 17 rifle rounds for 12 men. They had not received rations in 8 days. These were not the supermen Oberst Richter had praised. These were starving soldiers abandoned by a logistics system that had collapsed. The replacement pipeline, industrial warfare's secret weapon. The American replacement system operated with industrial efficiency that Wehrmacht officers could not comprehend. A soldier killed or wounded in France was replaced through a pipeline that spanned the Atlantic Ocean. Training camps across the United States processed recruits through basic infantry training lasting 17 weeks. Upon completion, soldiers were transported to ports of embarkation where Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels built at a rate of 3 per day at peak production, carried them across the Atlantic. In England or France, replacement depots received these soldiers and held them for assignment. When a regiment reported casualties, replacement soldiers were dispatched by truck convoy to the front lines within 24 to 48 hours. The entire system, from training camp to frontline foxhole, operated continuously, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, throughout the war. Harold Frank witnessed this system in action repeatedly. In October 1944, 4 months after D-Day, he looked around his company and realized he recognized no one. Every face was new. The original regiment had ceased to exist. They were replacements of replacements. Frank himself had been wounded 3 times by this point. In August, mortar shrapnel had torn through his left shoulder in Normandy. He was evacuated to a field hospital, treated, and returned to his unit in 14 days. In November, a German rifle round hit his leg during street fighting in Metz. Evacuation, treatment, return, 21 days. In January 1945, frostbite damaged his feet during the Battle of the Bulge. This time there was no evacuation. Medics treated him in a forward aid station and he continued fighting. Each wound earned him a Purple Heart Medal. Each wound would have permanently removed a German soldier from combat, because Wehrmacht medical evacuation and treatment could not match American efficiency. Frank was not extraordinarily lucky. He was adequately lucky within a system designed to keep soldiers operational. The Battle of the Bulge, adequate soldiers, infinite system, December 16, 1944. Germany launched its final major offensive on the Western Front through the Ardennes Forest, the Battle of the Bulge. The 90th Infantry Division, including the 357th Regiment, was rushed north to contain the German breakthrough. For 30 days, the regiment fought in sub-zero temperatures, with snow depths reaching 3 feet. Soldiers developed frostbite, trench foot, and hypothermia at rates nearly matching combat casualties. Supply trucks brought not only ammunition and rations, but also winter clothing, replacement boots, and medical supplies to treat cold weather injuries. German soldiers fighting the same battle had no such luxuries. Intercepted German documents from the period reveal units reporting 70% frostbite casualties because winter clothing was unavailable. Some German soldiers wrapped their feet in rags because boot replacements did not exist. They fought on reduced rations, often a single meal per day, while American soldiers received 3 hot meals whenever tactical situations permitted. The 357th lost approximately 800 men during the Bulge campaign, but the regiment's effective strength never dropped below operational levels because replacements arrived daily. By contrast, German divisions that entered the offensive at full strength of 15,000 men were reduced to combat ineffective remnants of 3,000 within 3 weeks, with no prospect of reinforcement. Private Harold Frank, now a sergeant after battlefield promotions that came not from heroism, but from the simple mathematics of survival. Officers and NCOs died. Survivors were promoted to fill the vacancies. Described the moment he understood American victory was inevitable. It was mid-January 1945, during a brief lull in combat. He watched American supply trucks arrive in an endless convoy, bringing ammunition crates, gasoline drums, food containers, and medical supplies. Then he looked at captured German positions and saw Wehrmacht soldiers had been eating horse meat and fighting with ammunition so limited they were ordered to fire only when certain of a hit. Frank realized that America was not winning because it produced better soldiers. America was winning because it produced everything better. More food, more fuel, more bullets, more soldiers, and that this material superiority was insurmountable. 70,000 prisoners, the collapse of will. As the 357th pushed into Germany in spring 1945, the character of combat changed. German resistance became sporadic and desperate. Entire Wehrmacht units began surrendering en masse, preferring American captivity to continued hopeless fighting. During the Palatinate campaign in March 1945, the 357th captured approximately 10,000 German soldiers in 2 weeks. In April and May, as Germany collapsed, the regiment processed over 35,000 prisoners. The final tally exceeded 70,000 captured enemy soldiers, 23 times the regiment's original size. These were not cowards surrendering at first contact. Many were veterans of multiple fronts who made rational calculations that continued resistance was futile. Harold Frank participated in processing hundreds of these prisoners. He remembered one group in particular, 40 Wehrmacht soldiers who surrendered in late April 1945 near the Czech border. Their commanding officer, a major who spoke broken English, explained why they chose captivity. They had received no food supplies in 12 days. Their ammunition was exhausted. They had no medical supplies to treat their wounded. Most critically, they had received orders to continue fighting but no explanation of what they were fighting for. Berlin had fallen, Hitler was likely dead, and Germany was clearly defeated. The major said his men had fought with courage and discipline for 5 years across 3 continents, but that courage without purpose or support was suicide, not soldiering. These prisoners were fed American rations, provided medical treatment, and transported to POW camps. The same system that sustained American soldiers now sustained German captives. The Wehrmacht could not even feed its own combat troops. America could feed its enemies. The statistical impossibility of Harold Frank. Of approximately 3,000 men who landed with the 357th Infantry Regiment at Utah Beach on June 6, 1944, only 400 to 500 were still with the regiment when Germany surrendered on May 9, 1945. This represented a survival rate of 13 to 17%. 83 to 87% of the original force was killed, wounded, captured, or transferred during 308 consecutive days of combat. Staff Sergeant Harold Frank was among the 400, a statistical anomaly who defied probability. He survived not because he was a superior soldier, but because he was an adequate soldier within a superior system. Frank was wounded 3 times, and each time the American medical evacuation system retrieved him from the battlefield, treated his injuries, and returned him to combat. He was promoted 5 times from private to staff sergeant, not due to exceptional leadership, but because the men who held ranks above him died and vacancies needed filling. He was fed 3 meals per day when tactical situations allowed, supplied with ammunition sufficient to engage any target without rationing concern, and equipped with uniforms, boots, and weapons that were replaced immediately when damaged. Frank later reflected that he did not know why he personally survived when better men died beside him. He attributed it to luck, providence, or randomness. But he acknowledged that whatever individual fortune he possessed was amplified by systemic advantages that Wehrmacht soldiers never enjoyed. In April 1945, Frank experienced a moment of clarity. He stood in a German town the regiment had just captured and realized he was alive because the American system had sustained him, fed him when hungry, warmed him when cold, healed him when wounded, and armed him when fighting. The Wehrmacht did none of these things for its soldiers. They died of starvation, exposure, treatable wounds, and lack of ammunition. German soldiers possessed courage. American soldiers possessed logistics. In total war, logistics defeated courage every time. Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, May 8, 1945. The day before Germany's official surrender. Staff Sergeant Harold Frank, 22 years old, 3 Purple Hearts pinned to his chest, 2 Bronze Stars for valor, 308 days of continuous combat survived, stood in the town square and watched German soldiers surrender by the hundreds. They filed past in ragged columns, men who had fought across Russia, North Africa, and France, but who now walked with hollow eyes and skeletal frames. These were supposed to be the elite warriors that Oberst Richter had praised, the veterans hardened by years of combat, who would slaughter inexperienced American farm boys. Instead, they were defeated men grateful to be prisoners because American captivity meant food and safety. Frank looked at his own hands. They trembled slightly, a condition that would never fully disappear for the rest of his 93 years of life. He thought about the faces he would never see again. Hundreds of men who had trained with him at Camp Barclay, fought beside him in Normandy, died in the mud at Metz or the snow in the Ardennes. He was one of approximately 400 original soldiers still standing from the 3,000 who had landed at Utah Beach. The regiment had suffered 6,000 casualties, double its starting strength. Every position had been filled twice on average, through the endless supply of replacement soldiers who arrived in trucks and died in foxholes, and were replaced by more trucks bringing more soldiers. Frank understood with sudden terrible clarity why he had survived. It was not because he was brave. Thousands of braver men had died. It was not because he was skilled. Thousands of more experienced soldiers lay in graves across France and Germany. He had survived because the American system was designed to keep soldiers like him alive and fighting. When he was wounded, medical corpsmen evacuated him within minutes. Field hospitals treated him with sulfa drugs and penicillin that saved lives German field surgeons could only watch drain away for lack of medicine. When he was hungry, supply trucks brought rations. When he needed ammunition, entire convoys delivered millions of rounds. When winter came, quartermasters issued winter uniforms. When his rifle broke, armorers handed him a new one. The Wehrmacht provided none of this for its soldiers. Frank had fought German veterans and recognized their courage and tactical skill often exceeded his own. But courage without food was starvation. Skill without ammunition was uselessness. The Germans were not defeated because they were cowards or incompetents. They were defeated because their logistics system collapsed, while America's never faltered. Frank wrote in his diary that evening, words published decades later in his memoir, "I did not win this war. The factories in Detroit won it. The farms in Kansas won it. The Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic won it. I was just a gear in a machine that never stopped running." The 357th Regiment died twice over in casualties, but the regiment never ceased to exist because America kept sending more gears to replace the broken ones. I am not a hero. I am a survivor of a system that was unbeatable. We did not win because we were better soldiers. We won because we had more of everything, and in industrial war, more always defeats better. The final accounting was written in numbers that told a story of mathematical inevitability. 308 consecutive days of combat without pause, 3,000 soldiers in the original regiment, 6,000 total casualties, 200% of initial strength. 70,000 German prisoners captured, 23 times the regiment's size. 400 to 500 original survivors, an 83 to 87% attrition rate. 1,600 kilometers fought from Utah Beach to Pilsen. These statistics represented not triumph of individual heroism, but triumph of industrial system over warrior culture. The 357th Infantry Regiment became part of the 90th Infantry Division's record as the third most decorated American division of World War II, earning 3 Medal of Honor recipients, 4 Distinguished Unit citations, and campaign credits spanning every major battle from Normandy to Czechoslovakia. Yet individual decorations and unit citations obscured the deeper lesson written in blood across Europe. The American replacement system, the pipeline that transformed civilians in Texas training camps into combat soldiers in French foxholes within 8 weeks, was the true weapon that destroyed Wehrmacht resistance. This system operated with ruthless efficiency that consumed individual soldiers like fuel and produced combat power as consistently as Detroit produced tanks. Oberst Wilhelm Richter survived the war and was interrogated by American intelligence officers in July 1945. The transcript preserved in archives revealed his retrospective analysis. When asked why Germany lost, Richter discussed strategy, leadership, and tactical errors before finally addressing his March 1944 assessment of the 357th Regiment. He admitted his fundamental miscalculation. He had evaluated soldiers as individuals when he should have evaluated the system that produced and sustained soldiers. A Wehrmacht veteran was indeed superior to a green American recruit in individual combat skill, but that superiority was irrelevant because the American system replaced casualties faster than Germany could inflict them. Richter described watching his own division decline from 15,000 men in 1943 to 4,000 by 1945 with no replacements, while American divisions he fought maintained consistent strength through constant reinforcement. He concluded that modern war between industrial nations was not decided by which side produced better warriors, but by which side produced more warriors, and sustained them longer, and replaced them faster. Germany had emphasized quality. America had weaponized quantity. In total war, quantity delivered through efficient system defeated quality, degraded through attrition. The legacy of the 357th Infantry Regiment endured beyond military historians' analyses. Harold Frank lived until 2017, reaching age 93 as one of the last surviving original members of the regiment. He spent 72 years processing trauma that never fully healed, nightmares of hedgerow fighting, guilt over surviving when friends died, inability to explain to civilians the mathematical lottery of survival. He published his memoir late in life, a cathartic exercise in making sense of statistical improbability. His central message remained consistent through decades of interviews and presentations. He was not exceptional. The system was exceptional. The American military had created a machine that transformed ordinary young men from small Texas towns into soldiers, sustained them through hell with food and ammunition and medical care, and replaced them when they fell so the machine never stopped. This system proved decisive not only in World War II, but in establishing paradigm for all subsequent American military operations. The lesson was clear. Professional soldiers and warrior elites could not defeat citizen soldiers backed by overwhelming logistics and industrial production. The Wehrmacht trained superior infantry and produced superior tanks, but lost because it could not sustain operations when supply lines collapsed and replacements ceased. The 357th Regiment fielded adequate soldiers, but prevailed because supply lines never collapsed and replacements never ceased. Gefreiter Klaus Müller, in his final letter before death at Metz, had articulated the truth from the German perspective. The Americans are not super soldiers, they are farmers with rifles, but it does not matter how many we kill, they always return with more farmers. We diminish until we cease to exist. They remain constant, fed by something we cannot see, factories, farms, ships crossing the Atlantic bringing infinite replacements. We did not lose a battle. We lost a war of resources we could never win. This was the verdict of history rendered through the experience of the 357th Infantry Regiment. Wars between industrial nations were won not on battlefields, but in factories, not by heroes, but by systems, not through courage, but through logistics. Harold Frank, farmer from Flatonia, Texas, survived 308 days of combat and 6,000 casualties because America built a system that kept adequate soldiers fighting longer than Germany could keep exceptional soldiers alive. The 357th proved that in modern warfare, sustainable adequacy defeats unsustainable excellence. This truth, paid for with blood across 1,600 kilometers of Europe, remained the regiment's enduring lesson. Industrial systems that sustain ordinary soldiers infinitely will always defeat military cultures that consume extraordinary soldiers without replacement. America did not win World War II because it produced better soldiers than Germany. America won because it produced more soldiers better supplied, better fed, better equipped, and better replaced. The 357th Infantry Regiment, 3,000 men who became 6,000 casualties who captured 70,000 prisoners, was mathematical proof that the age of warrior elites had ended. The age of industrial warfare had begun, and in that new age, the nation with stronger logistics would always prevail over the nation with stronger warriors.